Oh, I desperately need a haircut. And a threading. Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Lessons and Stories. My name is Shree and let's waste some time together. So I'm gonna be fanning myself throughout this video because India is super hot today and I made the mistake of putting makeup on my face and I think I'm going to melt. I'm gonna try to get through this review as fast as possible. I also have to say that I'm not kind of like a review channel. The last movie review I did was around like 2 years ago. I'm more of a video essay channel for those of you who are new here. But I just felt like I wanted to talk about this topic because I just freshly came out of a horror movie binge. And by binge, I mean I watched 2 movies back to back. 2 horror movies is enough for me because after that I'm like, I can't sleep anymore. And that's exactly what happened. I woke up with only 5 hours of sleep and I have been cranky all day. So let's get through this video. Okay, so like I said in the beginning, I watched 2 movies back to back. One of them felt like a snooze fest right at the beginning, but ended up being one of the best horror / psychological thrillers that I've watched this year. And the other one, was just like, it opened with such a strong promise and character development, but ended up falling flat on its face by the 3rd act that it actually made me mad at how much potential was wasted in this movie. Okay, so the 2 movies that I'm talking about are The Rental, that's been directed by Dave Franco, and The Lodge. The director, I can't remember, but I'm gonna put it in the screen. So I went into both these movies with not a particularly a great idea about what they were. I didn't read the premise or anything. I just went into them blind. A friend of mine suggested me these movies. I'm like, sure, why not? I don't have anything else to do. And I have to admit one thing. The Rental, which is directed by Dave Franco, I know him as an actor, but I'm not particularly familiar with Dave Franco's work. Like, the only thing I've watched him in is probably 21 Jump Street, and he didn't have a big role in it. And other than that, I don't know much about him except the fact that he's he's James Franco's brother, and that this was his directorial debut. That's what I already knew, but other than that, no, I don't think I know much about Dave Franco's work. So the reason why I'm pointing this out is because when I went into The Rental, at least I had a shred of an idea about what it is I was walking into. Oh, I know the director from certain work or that. But when I started watching The Lodge, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't know the director, I didn't know who the actors were. I went into it completely blind. At least with The Rental, I had some idea, and I knew that Alison Brie was in it, and she's one of my favorites from Community. So I walked into both these movies blind, but at least with The Rental, I knew who the director was. You might be asking yourself this question right now, that why am I comparing these 2 movies that have no connection with each other and the directors are different, and what's the point here? The reason why I'm comparing these 2 movies, I'm going to compare these 2 movies today, is because not only because I watched them together in the same, back to back in the same time, but also both these movies had a similar effect on me, but the opposite. I know that sounds kind of weird, but you'll see what I mean if you stick around to this video. Now, I have to give a fair warning, spoilers galore for The Rental if you haven't watched it already. So if you haven't watched that movie, come back and watch this video after you've watched the film. I actually recommend it, but just stick around and you will see what I mean when I use the word disappointed. Now, the reason why I use the word disappointed for The Rental is because normally when I have like a horror binge or when I'm sitting down to watch a slasher movie, a generic slasher movie, I don't care about what the plot is going to be. I don't care who the director was, and I don't care that, oh, this is an actor that has turned into a director and now this is a directorial debut and I should watch it. I'm not, I'm not ecstatic about it or anything. So I was just going into this movie just to have a fun time, just like we all have fun times with the slasher. We shut off our minds and we just enjoy the work. But because this movie became so good up until the payoff, and because this movie was such a good character-driven movie instead of a plot-driven movie, that it was something that I wasn't expecting from a new director or even like from Dave Franco, I have to admit, that I was actually left pleasantly surprised. Then the third act rolled out, and I got mad. I actually have to admit that I was so disappointed because I was so invested in this film for the better half of it, actually, that I got mad at how it turned out. I also have to point out that I think there's a reason why this movie stands at 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. In fact, both these movies, The Lodge and The Rental, stand neck and neck at around 75% on Rotten Tomatoes. There's a reason to it, and I'll get to that in a second. Before someone zones out that I mentioned Rotten Tomatoes, listen. There is a reason why the Rotten Tomatoes rating stands dead center every time you Google a movie. You know, like it's always there. It still means something. And sometimes I actually don't agree with Rotten Tomatoes ratings, but in this case, I actually did for both. Like the Rotten Tomatoes score, 75% of this movie was good in my opinion, like aka the first, the second act. The reason why I say this is because the characters were so well developed. They were well written characters, and there was so much backstory going on between the four of them. There was tension being built up. It was more than your generic slasher movie. It's more than what you would expect from a generic slasher movie, you know? And that really pleasantly surprised me. Honestly, there was just so much backstory going on between all these. There was so much tension being built between these four characters that I was just waiting and waiting for this bubble to burst. You know, it was like a claustrophobic situation going on, and there was a third party that was just ready to fuck it up, and that was just ready with the information that would allow these four people to just completely eat each other alive. There was potential for that, you know, like if you were in that situation, you would probably erupt as well. And in that situation, I think like the killer didn't need to even do anything at that point. He could have just sat back with some popcorn and just watching the shit show on his monitor. You know, he could just provoke any of these four characters, especially the younger brother character, and just watch the whole show for free. I mean, they proved the mental illness of the younger brother. I mean, he was dealing with anger management issues or some kind of an imbalance where he just reacts instead of assessing the situation. They also kind of proved how devoted the wife was to the older brother, and you know, she was willing to let go of her kind of her insecurity, maybe a little bit of fear that she had that her husband is very intimate with his female colleagues. She was willing to let that go even. And Mina, the third character, she always had this knack of like trying to prove some kind of like moral high ground of self-righteousness and political correctness that, you know, like that became very hypocritical because she ended up screwing a married man who was on vacation with his wife. So, this is what I mean. There was just so much potential there. All of these characters were so well built, and the hypocrisy of like Mina and the older brother was showing that it actually kind of made me sad that this entire balloon just deflated anticlimactically instead of bursting like it should have, in my opinion. Now, I know what I'm saying is that, you know, like the pressure cooker was building and the pressure was rising and it would have burst in a really fun way if allowed to, but if that happened, the killer probably wouldn't have had much to do anyways, because all four of them would have eaten each other alive and he wouldn't have anything to do at all, which wouldn't have made this a slasher movie. Instead, it would have probably tilted towards drama, psychological horror, mystery kind of a movie instead of a slasher movie. I can see that, but I think it would have made for a more interesting film if that occurred. Like the slasher element was there was this killer that was trying to screw with these people, but at the same time it's not just about the killer with a knife or a machete or a hammer, but it's also about these 4 people who are not perfect and they were dealing with their own situation in their own way. I don't know. I would have liked to watch that movie, you know? Also, another thing that bothered me a little bit was that the killer didn't even have to lay everything out to them all at once, all the facts. I mean, he could have fucked with them a little bit, you know, bit by bit, slowly feeding them the information about the infidelity. And with the guilty parties, he could have blackmailed them to the point where, you know, like they would become paranoid and made mistakes themselves, and they would have like screwed their own chances of keeping this a secret. Kind of like what happened with the Black Mirror episode, I don't know if you've watched it, called Shut Up and Dance. All the people that we were watching in Shut Up and Dance were actually guilty. They were being blackmailed, but we were actually the victims who were being gaslit into thinking that, oh, these are the innocent people. They're just being blackmailed by this anonymous hacker, only to have the script flipped on us and we realized that, oh, we were rooting for the bad guy all along. Also, a great angle was shown here. It was kind of being worked and worked, which ended up having no payoff. It ended before anything interesting could even happen. The younger brother character was shown to have some kind of a problem with controlling his anger. He's shown to have a bit of an anger issue, and he's working on it apparently because, you know, he's shown to be so sweet and gentle and kind with his brother and everybody else and with his girlfriend. It was shown that he was like working on it, which clearly was not working, and it kind of tells us that he has some kind of probably an anger management issue or a mental disorder or any kind of behavioral disorder, and to gaslight someone with a mental illness, to gaslight someone with trouble controlling their emotions like anger is a very dangerous game to play. He was essentially being gaslit into thinking that he killed someone for no reason and that he, well, consequently brought shame upon his brother and his significant other, and that is a dangerous territory because that is exactly what happened to our main character in the other movie that I watched right after called The Lodge. Now, The Lodge really surprised me, and like I said before, that I think there's a reason why both these movies have around a 75% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, in my opinion, before someone loses their mind, because just like The Rental, The Lodge, in my opinion, has a fantastic first and a final act, and the second act is kind of a slow burner, in my opinion. Now, the beauty of The Lodge was, just like the beauty of The Rental, was that I had no idea about these two movies going in. At least with The Rental I knew, like I said, who the director was, but with The Lodge I had no idea who the writer or director was of this film, and I was left pleasantly surprised after watching this movie. I mean, the first and the third act of this movie are phenomenal. The first act of the movie itself kind of shows us immediately that this movie is going to be dealing with a lot of mental illness and disturbing subject matter. You'll see what I mean when you watch the film. And also, the main character of the film, this woman that I was talking about, is hidden from us and for a while, and it kind of builds this tension of who she is. The mystery is set up and I'm really into it now. And around the second act, when we get to know this woman a little bit more, I have to say it was a slow journey than I would have expected. I was almost going to shut off the movie because, like I said, in the second act, I didn't enjoy it as much as the first and the third act because there were some dream sequences and a few jump scares that I didn't appreciate, but I kept on going because they kept hinting at this woman's mysterious mental illness, And also, there were 2 child characters in this movie that were very interesting, by the way. So I stuck around for that reason. And also, I can't completely reject the second act because the slowness of the second act added to this dreariness and loneliness and fear and isolation that all these 3 characters faced. They were devoid of food, they were devoid of electricity, they didn't know what was going on, it was completely silent around them, and it added to that effect. I just would have preferred a little bit more speed, I guess, and a little less jump scares and dream sequences. I never appreciate that stuff. But boy, when the third act rolls in this movie, I was pleasantly surprised and I was on the edge of my seat right up until like the final moments of the film, which is very rare for me. After like the climax rolls out, after it's finished and it's like the final few moments before the credits roll in, I was still at the edge of my seat in this film. Without giving away too much of this film, the entire movie kind of tells you simply why you should not screw with a person with a mental illness, why you should not fuck with their medication, why you should not gaslight them into thinking that they're evil or deserve to be in hell or anything else that's not true, because the consequences of that can be unimaginable. I have to say, this movie really tied up the mental illness angle perfectly from like the beginning scene to the end. And it's exactly what I was expecting from the rental, especially with the younger brother character. And unfortunately, I didn't get it. By potential wasted, I mean that like when the wife found out about the infidelity and when she left the house, when she just drove off, I kind of felt deflated because there was like, she could have caused such a bigger scene because she devoted so much time and energy in this man, and she put her trust and faith in this woman, this colleague of his, and she was just completely, I don't know, like her trust was completely broken, and I was just hoping for like a bigger like scene than just her driving away and then getting hammered in the head. So yeah, that was that. But at the same time, I kind of considered it and I was like, okay, people deal with traumatic incidents a little differently. I mean, I don't know how I would react at that time. Maybe even I would want to be left alone. So I kind of let that go. And there was also the brother who was being gaslit. So I was kind of anticipating something to happen there as well. But when the brother finds out, when the younger brother finds out about this affair, this quickie, and he just like gets mad and he charges at his brother, his older brother, who is dead in a ditch at this point, which was another potential wasted, by the way. I would have loved to see that fight. And then he gets a hammer to the head in the hallway, in the dining room, and he just quickly dies and just nothing happens. I just let out a collective sigh, followed by a major oof. I mean, it made me so mad because I can't believe I waited this long for that to happen. I mean, I can't believe that I waited until the end of the movie for the dumb bitch to just fall off a fucking cliff. I mean, no one learned any lessons. No one truly paid the price for their indiscretions. No one lived long enough to see their loved ones die or consequently see their love die for the other person. Everybody just died separately, like the equivalent of 4 separate car accidents, and most of the time, I think all of them didn't even have the time to register what happened to them. You know, they died with their issues still unresolved. It really pissed me off. Now that I think about it, funnily enough, the killer actually gave them quick, merciful deaths instead of like what their loved ones would have inflicted upon them. They would have given them a more painful death or a painful existence. And unfortunately, no one gave a shit to explore that angle. I mean, who knows what could have happened, but you know. But it really made me mad, so here I am talking about it. I mean, as much as I can complain about the rental, I have to admit that I also enjoyed this film, the first 2 acts at least, and the good character development, the good direction, the masterful direction, and even the end credits, the credit sequence was very fascinating. For this being his first movie, this directorial debut, Dave Franco actually did a pretty phenomenal job, I have to admit, as a conclusion to this video. I mean, the reason why I mentioned the end credits is because I love the fact that they didn't do a face reveal of the killer, because it kind of left with a lot of questions, even made it a little bit meta, because at the end of the day we don't know if the killer was the brother of the racist guy, or whether he was the director of this film, or whether he was just some random psycho that just happened to stumble upon this house. A lot of questions were left unanswered. And I'm actually glad, because I hate it when directors and writers spoon feed everything to the audience like I'm some kind of child. So anyways, I'm going to end this rant. I hope you guys liked it. I hope you guys watch The Lodge too, because that's a really good film. I can't stop recommending it. And also, I would recommend you watch The Rental too, because it's a pretty enjoyable film, I have to admit. If not for the horror, at least if you are a fan of Dave Franco, you can go check it out. I mean, not in theaters, obviously, but you know, in wherever it's available. So thank you so much for watching. I really enjoyed making these kind of like impromptu videos, and I hope I can think of another idea to make more of these. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope I didn't waste your time. See you next week. It's okay, I'm not gonna melt,